Hey everyone, Kristen here. This is just a quick note to let you know that Our Path is seeking a new executive director to lead the organization into the next chapter. To learn more about this important role, please email the board of directors at board@ourpath.org. And I'd like to take another moment to thank some very special people, our donors. You make this podcast possible. We incur expenses related to production, recording, and editing, and your support means that we can continue bringing you this content. On behalf of myself, the Our Path staff and board of directors, and thousands of listeners, your support is greatly appreciated. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Our Voices, the podcast for straight partners and partners of trans people by Our Path. I'm your host, Kristen Kelbley. Our guest today is Michelle Mays. Michelle is a licensed professional counselor and an expert in treating sexual betrayal and trauma. She's the author of the new book, The Betrayal Bind: How to Heal When the Person You Love the Most Has Hurt You the Worst. Michelle has created the Braving Hope treatment model to address the devastating dilemma that betrayed partners face when their significant other is unsafe to connect to, yet connection is the key to healing. Michelle is a licensed professional counselor and supervisor in both Virginia and Washington, D.C., and a certified sex addiction therapist and supervisor, and is currently completing her PhD in clinical sexology. Welcome to the podcast, Michelle. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I've listened to you on some other shows, and I really wanted to get you on our show because so many of the population we serve have experienced sexual deception, infidelity as part of the marital closet that they find themselves in. Not always, but you just have a model for talking about this that I think is going to be so, frankly, validating and liberating for a lot of our listeners. And let's just dive into the first question, which is, what is an attachment-based model for understanding impacts of cheating in relationships?
So, yeah, I think, as I was looking at the research on attachment, what really struck me is the similarity between the dilemmas that children who are being parented by a caregiver who is unable to show up for them in a consistently safe, nurturing way. What happens to children when they experience that, and how similar that is to what happens to us as adults when our primary attachment figure, who's our partner, when we're grown-ups, what happens to us when our partner becomes unsafe. And so I was looking at that, and I was looking at the similarities of that, and that led me down the road of really thinking about, when we're really looking at partner betrayal, we really haven't done a really deep dive into unpacking the way that our attachment systems drive what happens when we experience betrayal and the binds that puts us in when we're dealing with betrayal. So I took a deep dive into that and started to really look at that, and then created an attachment-based model for both understanding and treating partner betrayal.
Okay, so for listeners who aren't familiar with attachment, it's kind of this this term that at least I've heard it most often in conjunction with parenting. Like, what's your parenting style and what kind of attachment bonds do you create with your children? But it also, some of our listeners may have heard it in relationship contexts, like what's your attachment style to your partner? Are you anxious, or are you? That's not necessarily what you're talking about here, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, it is.
So I would say it starts there,
Okay.
right? It
Yeah.
starts with, so our attachment with our caregivers, with our parents, how we attach to them, meaning how the relationship with them functions, shapes how we attach in our relationships as adults.
Okay, so they're connected. Yeah.
So it's absolutely connected. We used to think that all our attachment needs went away once we grew up, but that is just not true.
Mm-hmm.
And what actually happens is that in our romantic relationships, our romantic partner becomes our primary attachment figure in many of the same ways that our parents were our primary attachment figure. And so obviously we can take care of ourselves much better as adults and we don't need to be fed. Most of us don't need the same level of care that we needed as children, but our basic emotional needs to feel safe and securely connected don't change over our lifespan. Right. And so the person who becomes that safe base for us and that close connection is our romantic long-term partner.
And what does that do for us? So if it's going well, if you've got a secure attachment with your romantic partner or life partner, I imagine it has physiological impacts, emotional and psychological well-being effects. What does that do for us when it's going well?
Yes. So I think the thing that sometimes we don't understand is that, so think about it this way, when we often, I don't know that people are doing this anymore actually, but we used to, when we got married, use the language of the two shall become one, kind of this poetry language. And what that was actually articulating was a scientific reality, which is that when we pair bond, so when we form long-term relationships with our romantic partner, we actually become one physiological unit. So our partner regulates our heart rate, our blood pressure, our hormones, our breathing. And so when we're in these long-term relationships, we are literally a unit biologically. We are functioning. And so we have a profound impact on one another.
Wow.
And when our relationship is going well, we tend to co-regulate each other, meaning that our two bodies are in a nice sync with one another where we feel good around each other, or we feel able to turn to each other in moments of stress and find that that is helpful. That when we turn to our partner, it helps us feel better. It helps us feel more calmed down and more grounded again. And so when it's working well, it really supports our bodies and it supports our emotional selves. When it is not going well, same thing. It has a profound impact on our bodies, on our emotions. Everything gets profoundly dysregulated inside us. We start to feel distress, and our typical, oh, let me turn to you for help doesn't work as well, because now there's difficulty and stress in the relationship. So we don't have somebody to turn to with the stress that we're feeling in the same way either. Right. So how your bond is functioning has enormous impacts on how you feel in your body and in your life.
So as I'm listening to you talk about this, it feels like if there's sexual deception of some kind or another, a secret of some kind or another. Dr. Omar Manwala calls it, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, he calls it a secret sexual basement, right?
Yeah.
And in our cohort, that could mean infidelity. It could also mean the sexual orientation or gender identity of your spouse, which you're just not aware of, whether they're intentionally keeping it or not. There's a sexual secret between you, period. Even if there's no nefarious ill intent, right? So it sounds like if there's something amiss in the energy of the home, that has, even if you don't know what it is, it's going to impact everybody else in the home. You're going to sense that underlying unsafety. You're going to sense that underlying, like, there's a disconnect between me and my partner. I don't know what it is. And that's going to start to throw things out of whack even before you ever even really know what's happening.
Yes, I talk about this a lot because there's sort of what happens pre-discovery of betrayal or whatever's happening that's disruptive in the relationship. But then there's the period of time where it hasn't been discovered yet, but it is present in the relationship. And in marriage and family therapy circles, there's this term free-floating anxiety. And that term describes this feeling in our partnerships where it's like, there is something wrong. I can feel it. I can feel that there's a disconnect between us. There's something amiss. Something's going on with you. I can't figure out what it is. I keep asking, is this okay? Is this okay? Are you mad at me? Are you this? Are you this? Are you this? I keep trying to figure it out. And every time I try to figure it out, I keep being told, no, everything's okay. All is well. So now I have free-floating anxiety. I have anxiety that I can't attach to anything.
Right.
But I feel it, and I feel it all the time. And then the body interprets that feeling as threat. So the body starts to experience a sense that there's something dangerous floating around in the relationship. And then that impacts you. So even though you don't yet know about everything and maybe you're not in the kind of big distress that typically follows discovery, you might, so for example, I think for a lot of people, it shows up in their libido. Sometimes they start to have a lower sexual desire for their partner just because their body is actually sensing something's unsafe here.
Right.
And so the body starts to shut down, and they may consciously be thinking, what is wrong with me? Like, why don't I want my partner in the same way? Why don't I want sex in the same way?
Right.
What they may go to the doctor about it. They may read books about it. They may be trying to figure it out while the body is actually responding to the anxiety in the relationship. Or they could start to withdraw emotionally. Different things like that can start to happen.
I actually had goosebumps when you were talking because I just recognized it, in my own experience. So I recognized that moment of, it's like precognition, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's operating under the surface. You can feel some, and it's crazy making. Part of the whole piece about that is am I going crazy? Like, am I imagining this? I have no reason to doubt or to suspect that anything's wrong. And yet there's the disconnect and I can't solve it. And I ask about it, all the things that you were saying. So I think a lot of listeners will recognize that. So let's talk about, okay, so there's this kind of sequence of events that we're kind of falling into. There's the sort of pre-disclosure or pre-discovery where there's an ambient sort of unrightness in the home or in the relationship. And then there's like, and you were talking about, you ask, and then your partner says, no, everything's fine. And this is a form of gaslighting. We've all heard this term. And there's different kinds of, I was reading on some of your writing, your blog, that there's different kinds of gaslighting. It's called intentionally manipulated reality, and there's different tactics. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I kind of split gaslighting up into 4 different types. So there's just straight up lying, which I don't really consider gaslighting so much, except for when it's lying by omission. Because I do think that often someone will answer a question and kind of say, well, you didn't ask me that. And that does feel incredibly crazy making, like you have to somehow get the exact wording to get the information you're looking for. So there's lying. There's, I was at work when I was really with somebody with an affair partner or with, acting out in some way, that kind of thing. And then the second kind is reality manipulation. And that is when you really start to make the betrayed partner question their ability to perceive reality accurately. We perceive reality through our 5 senses. So it's the information we take in, it's through our 5 senses. And if you are being told, no, you didn't really see that, no, you didn't really hear that, no, you didn't really read that, or what you read, you've taken it out of context, or you're making a big deal out of something that isn't, or no, that didn't even actually happen, even though you did see it happen. So when you've got somebody who is really separating you from your ability to perceive your reality accurately, that will make you feel very, very destabilized and crazy. It'll make you feel very crazy. So that's the second form of gaslighting. A third form is scapegoating. And so this is when the betraying partner really blames you for what they have done. So they're blaming out their behavior. So I know for the population that I work with a lot, that can look like, I had an affair because you X. Like we had a baby and you started to pay too much attention to the baby. And that's why I went out and had an affair.
Right.
So it's blaming it out on the other person. And then the last category is coercion. And that's when you're trying to get the other person to accept your behavior, to accept things even though they don't want to. So that could look like the person starts to ask questions. What's wrong about the free-floating anxiety? What's wrong? What's going on? I can tell something's going on. Or, hey, I saw this text exchange and something's happening here and I really need to understand what it is and what's going on with this. And the coercion comes with, now I'm going to withdraw from you and give you the silent treatment for several days.
Right.
Now I'm going to in some way make you pay for trying to figure this out or inquiring. So it can look like that. It can also look like, hey, I want you to be okay with this. So I shouldn't need to let you know where I am. I shouldn't need to respond to you when you text. I shouldn't need to be faithful in our relationship. I shouldn't need to, whatever it is. So it's trying to coerce you into sort of giving up what you feel is best for you and going with the other person's agenda.
Right.
So those are the 4 types of gaslighting, and all of them really add up into separating you from your reality and from your ability to stay true to what you know is best for you and to articulate that in a really cogent way in your relationship.
And it's a, would you call it abuse? It's abusive to me.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's just,
absolutely.
emotional and psychological abuse.
Yeah, it's emotional and psychological abuse, because anytime we make it difficult for a person to know their reality, we're pushing them toward mental illness.
Yes. Yes.
You know, I think about that Scott Peck quote. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it's something like mental health is a commitment to reality at all times. And so we're pushing somebody away from their mental health anytime that we're gaslighting them. And that is a form of emotional and psychological abuse.
I'm so glad that you, and I think there's a small but growing and vocal group of people in this space who are calling a spade in this regard, because it seems like, and we'll talk about this maybe a little bit more later, I hope, that we get time, is that the therapeutic community doesn't always seem to acknowledge this as such. And there's a focus on reconciliation a lot of times, as opposed to saying, let's stop and acknowledge that there was real harm and that there was actually abuse as a part of this. And I think it just seems like getting really clear about that has been sort of lacking. I don't know if my impressions of that are accurate.
Yeah, I think we're making a shift around that. I don't know if, you know, for your population, maybe that shift is happening more slowly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. You know, I know if I think about working with betrayed partners who are dealing largely with heterosexual relationship cheating, I think we're getting clearer that the emotional and psychological impacts of gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse. And to me, the nuanced thing that we as clinicians have to do there, and what we have to hold clinically and help our clients with, is that the person who's doing the gaslighting and the lying, they're doing it for reasons that when you delve into all of that, you can understand what that's about for them and what it comes out of for them. But the impact of that on the other person is still a form of abuse.
Right.
So we have to be able to hold all of that together and say, we can be accountable for emotionally abusing another person, and have compassion and empathy and understanding about what led us into that.
Right.
We can be both responsible and forgiving with ourselves. We can actually do both. Yeah.
What a novel idea.
Yes.
That we can actually say, hey, I was under these pressures when I made these choices, and I understand that those choices impacted you in this way that was harmful. And for that, I'm sorry. I mean, I love what you said. We can be, was it accountable, responsible, and compassionate at the same time? Is that how you said it?
Yeah. Accountable, responsible, forgiving, and compassionate. All of that.
What an amazing concept. That's actually a really beautiful concept too. And I think it pushes us all towards more maturity as we look at our own sort of relationship health. So let's talk about the difference between discovery and disclosure. So in the world of sort of heterosexual affairs, there's discovery and disclosure about the affair. In our world, there may be a dual discovery and disclosure. There may be discovery and disclosure about an affair, and there also may be discovery or disclosure about a sexual orientation or a gender identity. So it's a multiple layered thing for the population. But you were saying that you noticed there's the differences between discovery and disclosure that you work with. What can you tell us about that?
So I consider discovery the process of either I'm going to just call everybody a betrayed partner.
That's fine. Yeah. We love shorthand around here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say you as the betrayed partner have discovered some piece of information about your partner's affair, acting out behavior. Maybe you have found information about their orientation, gender identity that all is counter to what you have thought in the past. So you've discovered information, or maybe they've even come to you and they have told you some information, but they haven't told you the whole truth. They've only maybe told you a little piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
So discovery is when you get like a partial piece of the puzzle, and then you're often led to believe that you know all there is to know and that it's not actually that big of a deal.
Right.
And discovery can trickle out over time. You can discover something, 2 months later, discover more, 2 months later, discover more. And each time your partner can handle every discovery by saying, yes, but it doesn't mean what you think it means. It just means this. And it, that just happened one time and it didn't mean anything. And, I'm never going to do that again. And we're all okay now. And then 2 months later, there's more, and you kind of go through the same dance. Yes, but that just, that actually had to do with that other thing. And that's nothing. It didn't mean anything.
Right.
So
right.
You're sort of over and over and over again running into your partner's need to continue to guard their secret.
Mm-hmm.
And their unwillingness or inability to come to you with the full truth of what's happening. So that is all considered discovery, and discovery can trickle out for months. I've seen discovery trickle out over years. It can weeks, it can go a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Disclosure, the difference between discovery and disclosure is that disclosure is when the other person is at the point where they are really, truly, fully ready to be fully transparent and honest about what has been going on with them. And they are ready to tell the secrets. They're ready to tell their reality. They're ready to share what's actually happening. And that process is usually done, and I hope for everybody that it is done with a trained therapist who really helps both the person who's ready to do that disclosure to write it out in a way that makes a lot of sense, cleans up all the secrets and lies and gaslighting that has happened, and also helps them really communicate this is exactly what's been going on.
Right.
And then that's done in a process where both people are supported therapeutically and have help around hearing the information and processing the information that's been shared.
Why is that so important for the whole truth to come out for the betrayed partner? What does that do for them going forward if they can get disclosure in a way that is respectful and takes into account their emotional and psychological needs?
Yeah. Well, so for starters, it gets rid of the free-floating anxiety. Mm-hmm. So it helps the free-floating anxiety to land. And it contains the danger for the betrayed partner. Mm. So until you get disclosure, your imagination can just kind of run wild with you.
Right.
You can just think, okay, well, I've seen this over here and I saw this over here and I heard this over here. And you can start to imagine all kinds of things about what's possible, what that meant. Usually what you have discovered makes you feel like the person you've been with is not who you thought they were.
Right.
So now you start to feel like they're a complete stranger and anything is possible.
Yep.
So because of that, your imagination sort of runs away with you. And when you get disclosure, it contains the danger. Mm. It puts the dangerous thing that you're facing and the threat, it grounds it and says, okay, here are the edges of this. Here is where your experience begins and ends. And now you can start to process it because you actually have a sense of what you're dealing with.
Right. Because if you're in the free-floating anxiety, if your body's still reacting to a potential unconscious or subconscious threat in the environment, you can't even begin to process it, let alone heal it. I like what you say. It basically puts boundaries around the betrayal so that now we can really understand what we're dealing with and we can begin to start to heal it.
Yes.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. I think our listeners will understand that. It doesn't happen a lot for us, unfortunately.
The
Yes.
disclosure doesn't happen a lot, or
Correct. I mean, sometimes it does, but it doesn't. We work with a lot of people where discovery happens in our community in much the same way. So there might be like you find the app on the phone or something and you open it up and then you realize your spouse has been talking to in a sexual way to someone of the same sex or something like that. So there's the multiple layer piece. It's both the behavior and who I thought they were, kind of a thing. So yes, and it's just it can be a layered and complicated experience for our population. Another show I was listening to you on and how it's like a multi-dimensional problem because immediately your past, present, and future have been changed. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime that you have a big revelation about secrets that have been being kept in the relationship, particularly the secrets that break the relationship agreements, that involve some kind of infidelity, some kind of cheating, that kind of thing. The minute that happens, it makes you start to question everything in your history because the person feels like you don't know them. You thought you knew them, but now you don't know them because they were able to do all of this and keep this secret from you and lie to you about it. Now you're looking at your whole past and thinking, well, when we were celebrating our anniversary in Hawaii, was that real?
Mm-hmm.
Or was that not is everything this person has said to me about our relationship and that they love me and that they want to be with me and grow old with me? Is any of that true?
Mm-hmm.
So your whole past comes into question. Your present, of course, has been rocked to the core by what is happening, and your present feels incredibly unstable. And your future also is now completely uncertain because the future you thought you were going into with this person, now all of that has gotten wiped out. And you're now looking at the future and thinking, I don't know what that holds or what that will look like, whether we will even be together, what being together or not together would look like. It's filled with uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a trauma that you're in the middle of experiencing. You've got a traumatic event that you're in the middle of, and it's affecting your past, your present, and your future all simultaneously.
Right.
So it's very complex.
Right.
And that's why I always refer to it as a multidimensional trauma. And for most people who are experiencing this, often when we come into therapy and we're dealing with traumatic events and the impacts of those events in our bodies, which is what trauma is, usually the event is over. But for people who are dealing with betrayal of any kind in their adult relationship, they're often coming in for help or for therapy and coaching, whatever it is. They're in the middle of the traumatic event. It's not over.
Right.
And it's actually unfolding as they're trying to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And that's a very different animal to deal with, both as a clinician and as a client, versus coming in and dealing with something that has already ended and it's a past event.
That's the first time I've ever actually heard that distinction being made. And I hadn't actually thought of it before, but it makes sense because the situation on the ground is completely still unfolding in real time while you're going through it. Right. Yeah.
Unfolding in real time. And the other piece about it is that I would say it's both multidimensional and it's dynamic, because each new piece of information, both each new piece of discovery information, but also each new piece of healing information as you're learning about your own experience and you're learning about betrayal trauma and you're learning about what's happening in your relationship. Every new piece of information changes how the whole thing looks.
Right.
So it's changing hour by hour and day by day. And when we think about traditional trauma treatment models, most of those models are built around the idea that the traumatic event is over with. Because what we know is that it's very challenging for people to process and cope with and deal with the traumatic event when it is still ongoing.
Right.
But in this population, that's actually what we are trying to do and have to do, is try to work with it while it's still unfolding. So it makes it really challenging for everybody.
This is kind of revelatory to me. I mean, if I want to just kind of use a different sort of analogy, if somebody's in a war zone, you wouldn't expect them to be able to process an IED attack on a roadside bomb as it's happening in that moment. We understand almost intuitively. We have to wait for that soldier or that person to get home and be in a safe environment and to be calm, and have some resources before they can even begin to process that traumatic thing that happened to them. And you're right. This is an ongoing thing.
Thing, and the lack of safety is ongoing. The lack of safety is ongoing. Yeah.
You can't process unsafety, like when you're in the unsafe environment that created the trauma to begin with. Wow. Okay. That's really new for me. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. Yeah. What about, one of the most important questions that I have been dying to ask you, quite frankly, is shame. It seems so interesting to me that shame is such a sticky wicket in these situations where if you're the betrayed partner, why do you feel shame? Like, why does the betrayed partner seem to immediately, upon disclosure or discovery, or once they have at least a decent enough understanding of what's happened, okay, there's been this betrayal, I am the betrayed partner, immediately I'm ashamed. Why is that?
I think there's different layers to that. So I think one of the layers is that when your partner is keeping secrets, when they've broken their relationship agreements and they're keeping secrets about that, often that secret keeping is about them defending against their own shame about their own behaviors, because they're often operating outside of their own value system in some way. So let's say you had somebody who's dealing with, I believe I have a different sexual orientation and I'm trying to figure this out. But while I'm trying to figure that out, I'm also cheating on my spouse, which feels really bad to me because that's not what my values are. So then I have to figure out how to cope with that inside myself. And the way I do that is often by what are called self-manipulation defenses, where I sort of manipulate myself and defend against my own shame by telling myself there's reasons why it's okay that I'm doing this.
Right.
And that process of doing that means that the shame becomes this sort of free-floating thing that is very easily transferred over onto the betrayed partner. And it often gloms onto them and they feel the shame around what is happening. And they feel like, there is something wrong with them, that they didn't know about what was going on. There's something wrong with them, that they picked this person to partner with. There's something wrong with them, that this person doesn't want them or isn't attracted to them. It can kind of glom onto all these different parts.
And culturally, that can get reinforced too. I mean, in our population, it looks like, well, why did you marry a gay man? Or what was wrong with you that you chose somebody who was of a different sexual orientation that was not compatible with yours to begin with? It can look like that. And those are questions that actually get asked out of people's mouths regularly.
I know, yes. So I call these shame intensifiers.
Yeah.
And one of the shame intensifiers is the culture.
Yeah.
And how the culture responds to these issues. And in our culture, it's very easy for us to blame the person who was betrayed.
Yeah.
Instead of holding the betrayer responsible.
Right.
And I don't know what that's about exactly
in
our culture, but I just see it all these different places,
We're very clear at our path at the organization that we understand that many of our spouses were in closets because of cultural bigotry and against sexual minorities. And we understand what put a lot of our spouses in closets in the first place. And one of our hopes and aims is that eventually one day there will be no need for an organization like ours, that everyone is totally free to be who they are. The cultural carried shame ends up with our spouses, and then that ends up on us. But then in a weird way, Michelle, on the back end, in certain areas of the culture, now there's this moment of like, well, sexual minorities have been discriminated against, have been persecuted. So we have to give them a total pass and be completely understanding of everything that's happened, right? Like, so we lose that moment that we were talking about earlier where it's like, hey, we can recognize that you were under these cultural pressures that maybe contributed to the reason why you didn't feel like you could be truly who you were, the reason why you felt like you needed to hide or it wasn't safe for you. And then also the responsibility piece of, and that's how it impacted my spouse.
And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the fact that there's actually room for all of it. Mm. There's room for everybody's experience, and there's room to both honor, you know, the struggle of the person who's dealing with a cultural carried shame around orientation and coming out of the closet and the journey that is. Mm-hmm. And also honor the straight spouse, betrayed partner who has been devastated by the experience of infidelity or whatever else, or just, you know, having their reality turned on its head, you know, and having to now understand their life in a completely different way. Like, to me, I think this is that place where accountability, responsibility, compassion, and forgiveness have to all kind of coexist. And everybody's experience has to be honored, and there has to be room for everybody's experience.
Thank you. Yes, we could end the podcast there, but we're not going to. I mean, that's just it's a fabulous summation of, yeah, if we are, that's what we're all working for, right? That's why we're doing the work that we're doing in some way, shape, or form, I would hope, is that so if we've been experienced these kinds of things, we can encourage those kinds of outcomes, because we know it's how challenging and difficult it is for relationships, families to go through these experiences. I want to ask you about something else about shame, though. It's in one of a different podcast I was listening to, you talked about how we can't heal shame that's not ours. We have to give it back. And this is something I feel like is key. In fact, this is the nugget that I couldn't wait to talk to you about, because I feel like so many people who we support carry shame or have had someone else's shame projected onto them that is not theirs. And how do we, if we can't heal shame that's not ours, but it's sticking to us like some kind of, you know, tar substance that we can't get rid of, how do we heal that? And if we can't heal that, how do we give it back? What does that look like?
Yeah. I'm just imagining how complex this is, you know, because I'm thinking, if you've got somebody who's coming out of the closet and they've got this enormous cultural carried shame piece where they've been carrying shame from the culture as they've been in the closet, and then they're trying to deal with that as they're coming out. And then you've got the straight spouse who's learning about it. That homophobia can easily come over, that carried shame can easily come over onto the straight spouse, I would imagine. And they can feel like, how did I not know this? Or how did I not, they can start to question themselves as a result of that shame.
Yes.
Is that feeling right?
Yes, it often happens. You blame yourself. How did I not know this? What did I miss? What did I not see? And in some cases, there are things where you did miss things legitimately, or you did not see things legitimately. I mean, I'll use myself as a brief example. I was 19 when I got together with my ex-husband, and some of the things that were sitting right in front of my face, I didn't know how to interpret at the time because I was young and I didn't understand what that meant, right? So yes, it's both and. Like, there are some people who are genuinely like, I had no idea. I really had no clue. And there are other people who like, well, there were things, but I didn't know how to interpret them. And then sometimes there are things, but for your own reasons, you just push that away. You ignore that, or you go, no, I can't afford for that to be true. So it's all of those different layers, right? And so you have to unpack like what's my role in all this? There is an unpacking of that. And there's a great deal of shame for what you missed or didn't see, or that you were duped. If you really, truly didn't see anything, you feel duped. So it's a very complicated experience there as well. And then if there's sexual betrayal on top of that, it's another layer, right?
Yeah. So let's just take that duped piece.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really good example.
Mm-hmm.
So many people feel like that and they think I was duped.
Mm-hmm.
I was a fool.
Mm.
That's the other thing I hear people say all the
Yeah.
time. I was such a fool
Mm-hmm.
for trusting. And I think that's such a clear example of where you have carried shame,
Yeah.
where the shame has come over and attached to you. Because what I always say to my partners that I'm working with is, it's actually healthy human behavior to trust your partner.
Mm.
It's healthy human behavior to believe your partner, unless there's, glaring evidence not to,
Right.
And so when we let shame attach to us, we're basically looking for something wrong in us because the other person had a secret and because the other person had something hidden going on. And so we need to really release that shame and let go of it and give it back.
Mm-hmm.
Say, actually, that was their journey. That was their secret. That was their struggle. That was whatever language we want to use.
Mm-hmm.
But we want to say that belongs to them because that was actually their story.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't need to take it on and then believe that there's something wrong with me.
Right.
Shame always makes us feel like there's something wrong with us.
Right.
Or broken or bad in us.
Yep.
So I don't need to take that on. And we can't, when it's shame that doesn't belong to us, we can't heal it because it's not actually connected to anything in our story.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing we can really do with it is to give it back and release it.
This is where it's like, and not everybody has access to this, I understand. I spent myself a couple of years doing experiential exercises in various settings around doing something in your body to symbolize, I'm giving this back to you. I'm taking this out of me. It doesn't belong to me. I am now putting this back where it belongs. And, you're doing it in where I did it, we called it Gestalt. You're doing it in a safe setting with a community of people, and you're able to get this thing that doesn't really belong to you outside of your own body in a symbolic way, but it actually, it's different than sitting in a therapist's office in a couch, which that's fabulous. And we all would love if we all had more access to if we want. And also then I feel like there's this experiential way that you can symbolically sort of give shame back that I wish we had more people had opportunity to do. Is this making sense?
Yeah, we have our folks do that in lots of different ways, our clients. So one way to do it is to write a letter giving shame back, and you can give shame back to the culture. You can give shame back to your partner. You can release shame. You can kind of, sometimes it's your parent, goes all the way back to your childhood. You can also do it with what we call chair work, where you imagine that the person that you need to release shame to is sitting in the chair. We often do it. You can do it. This is a really good way to kind of help it move through your body, which is to take a box of Kleenexes and hold it near your chest. And as you're giving the shame back to throw Kleenexes as you're doing it. You can't really throw a Kleenex.
Right.
If you've ever tried.
Right. But it's not about hitting the other person with something. It's about pulling it out of you.
It's about pulling it out of you and just letting your body have movement. Because when our body has movement, trauma is when things get stuck in our body. So when our body has movement, it's helping the body release things. So we're never, ever, when we're releasing carried shame, shaming another person. We're just releasing it. We're just saying it doesn't belong to us and I'm not going to carry it anymore. So you don't need like somebody else. You don't need the culture to own their thing. You don't need another person to own their piece.
Right.
For you to stop carrying the shame yourself.
Can we say that again? Like, we don't actually need them to acknowledge. We just need ourselves to say, I'm just not carrying it anymore. Whether you pick it up for yourself or not is not my business.
Yes, it's so interesting because in our coaching program, we have this letter writing exercise. And it's always interesting to me how quickly everyone wants to jump to, should I read this to my partner? Should I read this to them?
Right.
And I'm always like, slow your roll, sister. Because are we clear that we don't need them to do anything different for you to not carry the shame anymore? that this is about you creating change for you and moving yourself toward health. And you don't need them to do a thing for you to be able to do that. And I just always want to make sure everybody's clear on that, because it's so fast that everyone's so fast to move to that other part.
That makes so much sense. And I'm loving that I wish we had you for another hour, Michelle. I really do. And I want to be mindful of your time. So I know we have to close, but is there anything else that you feel like you would like to say to our population of people, or some insight, some wisdom, or that sort of thing?
I think the only thing I would say is that, I've been working in this field for over 20 years, and I am just amazed and privileged to watch the resiliency that we have as humans. And for those who are committed to healing and to changing their lives, it's really magical what can happen. And how much change is possible. And so if you're wondering if you're in an experience of betrayal of some sort, and you're wondering if you're ever going to feel good again, the answer is yes, that there is actually not just life after it, but there's flourishing after it. And there's amazing amounts of healing available.
I agree 1,000%. And what a fantastic message of hope to end on. And I just want people to know that they can find you, your blog, the treatment model that you talk about on your website, which is michellemais.com. And that's MICHELLEMAYS. And we'll have that in the show notes, and a link to your book, which is The Betrayal Bind: How to Heal When the Person You Love the Most Hurts You the Worst, which is, I know people are going to run out and grab that book. I can feel it, because there's just this, we're seeking healing. We're desperate for it. These wounds are so big sometimes and feel so unwieldy and feel so impossible to heal from, that we need this. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Michelle. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
I want to thank our listeners for tuning in today. Be on the lookout for all new episodes as they come out. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. You can find us wherever you get yours. This is a friendly reminder that the views of the host, yours truly, are not necessarily the views of Our Path or its board of directors. I want to thank our engineer and editor, Drew, right here at Play Audio Agency in Cincinnati, Ohio. And this is your host, Kristen, reminding you, until next time, keep using your voice.